The world is drowning in plastic. From city rivers to coastal waters, every wave tells the same story of waste, delay, and urgent need for change. But while the world debates, Southeast Asia is already moving. Today, we bring these voices together. Leaders, innovators, and changemakers discuss how to turn ambition into action. Welcome to the webinar.
Good afternoon, everyone in Southeast Asia. Good morning and good evening to all of you around the globe who are tuned in today. Welcome and hello from Manila. My name is Rocky Guzman. I am the International Legal and Policy Specialist Consultant from the Asian Development Bank, and I am honored to be the moderator of today's webinar entitled From Geneva to Southeast Asia, Turning Plastics Treaty Ambition into Action. Now, for today, we focus on policy, financing, and investment towards a circular plastics economy in the region. A very important topic, as we may all know, given the scale and magnitude of the plastic pollution problem affecting all of us here in Southeast Asia. And for this, we turn into ASEAN and national perspectives, highlighting how Southeast Asia is turning ambition into concrete action as we unpack the plastic treaty's outcome for the region, the implementation of national policies, and advancing circular solutions and mobilizing finance. But first, to give some context, some hard and fast facts would be useful. By 2060, plastic use is projected to triple, and in Asia, already generates over 60% of global mismanaged plastic waste. Now, to address this, in 2022, the United Nations Environment Assembly adopted a resolution to develop an international legally binding instrument aimed at eliminating plastic pollution, what we informally call here the Global Plastics Treaty. Now, the resumed fifth session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, or INC 5.2, was held just last August in Geneva. It was supposedly the last round of negotiations and was expected to deliver a final treaty text. However, despite intense discussions, governments were not able to reach a consensus, leaving uncertainty about the treaty's next steps. Now, against this backdrop, this panel will look at where we are now and what the plastics treaty means for countries, especially here in Southeast Asia. And that despite the setbacks, we'll be able to showcase notable national experiences, such as extended producer responsibility or EPR initiatives, and ADB support to strengthen implementation and promote circular economy investments and solutions that could be scaled up across the region. Now, before we start, I would like to acknowledge the organizers of this event, colleagues from the Green Finance Hub of ADB Southeast Asia's regional department, and the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, or ACGF, an initiative of the ASEAN Infrastructure Fund. This is also in cooperation with the Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department of ADB, and is hosted by ADB's Southeast Asia's Development Solutions, or SEADS platform. Mind you, we'll also be posting this on the SEADS YouTube page later on, so you can subscribe to that page and check that out later on. Now, at this point, we want to thank our esteemed panelists and reactors today for their insights and expertise. After the panel session, we will have comments and reactions from other experts, and then continue to have a Q&A segment, although you may ask your questions anytime to the question box below in your screens. Now, without further ado, let's start with the panel. We are honored to have our first panelist, Attorney Janice Rigoso. Janice is the Chief of Staff of the Office of the Director of the Environmental Management Bureau, or EMB, and concurrent Pollution Adjudication Board Secretary of the Philippine Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Janice was also in the thick of the action in Geneva in last INC 5.2, and will be able to share more of what happened there. We're glad to have you here, Janice. Thank you for joining, and over to you.
Thank you, Rocky. Good day, everyone. So I will be presenting the key takeaways on the global plastics treaty negotiations. Next slide, please. So the INC 5.2 happened, as mentioned by our moderator, happened in August of 2025 with the objective of finalizing the global legally binding treaty. Despite high expectations, no agreement was reached on a single consolidated treaty text. Next slide, please. So there was no consensus reached on the treaty text, although there were two alternative drafts which were introduced, but both of them have been criticized by member states during the discussion when they were introduced, and that's why no consensus was made. Um, Negotiations may still continue, but there is no date set for the next INC. So countries remain divided on binding and voluntary measures, as well as the scope and coverage of the Plastics Global Treaty. Um, Next slide, please. I'll be discussing the different key issues that were primordial during the INC 5.2. Number one is the life cycle of plastics. So there were discussions. Some of the member states do not want this life cycle of plastics approach. They just wanted to tackle on plastic pollution, while many other countries are wanted to include the life cycle of plastic so that it will be a whole of cycle of the use, production, consumption, and disposal of these plastics. Number two is the financing for developing countries. So this is another provision in the Global Plastics Treaty that remained a discussion until the end. Um, Number three is one protection of human health. They mentioned about there were discussions on inclusion of a separate standalone article on health, and some provisions in the other articles relating to human health. In the end, in the preambular, it was included in the preambular text for both uh, treaty texts that were proposed during the INC 5.2. So this is one of the main issues that remain unresolved as of uh, the end of INC 5.2. Also, the decision making on and compliance mechanisms, because decision making is another issue on whether to decide as all of the member states or majority. Another one is on compliance of the member states who will be joining the treaty, whether it will be a voluntary obligation or a mandatory one. So this were discussed during the INC 5.2. Next slide, please. So, lessons learned. Okay, this was nothing is agreed until everything is agreed because this was discussed. One of the rules during the INC 5.2. That's why, because if one member state will not agree, then it could not be brought to the plenary. That's why this this phrase is uh one of the lessons learned that I'm saying is that it should be, maybe it should be the plenary should consider a majority voting. Another one is the late draft releases, because the first draft was produced in the middle of the uh discussion of the INC 5.2, and the first draft was taken by some countries as a weak treaty text, and so another discussion was made, but it's already at the latter part of the discussion. That's why there was no consensus at the end. So also financing gap remains unresolved. And as mentioned earlier, there were discussions on whether to use an existing fund and another fund will be established for that, but it was not finalized since it was not brought up to the plenary. And then last is the need for inclusive participation mechanisms because all the member states are represented. There were observers in the negotiations, but they were um, given a short time to present their opinions and their perceptions of the provisions in the treaty, but nothing is was finalized. So next slide, please. So will there be an INC6? Actually, it should be the international rules, it should be a resumed fifth session of the Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee. So it's 5.3 maybe. But future INC session is expected, but it's not yet scheduled. In the last bureau meeting, it was announced the intention of the chair to resign, but still, no, there were other queries on the procedure if the chair will resign. And so it's another process that we have to go through. And I mentioned possible process reform and with discussion on using majority voting instead of full consensus. High Ambition Coalition is still pushing for a stronger text, although the Philippines is not a member of officially a member of this High Ambition Coalition, but during the discussion, it was mentioned that one of the we were getting impressions that the Philippines is for a treaty that is highly ambitious. The provisions of the treaty for which are considered as highly ambitious. And then, of course, national and regional plastic control efforts will still continue in parallel while we are waiting for the INC to push through with the Global Plastics Treaty. Next slide, please. So I only have a few slides. This will be my last slide. And for the Philippines, we are not stopping with the Global Plastics Treaty. So I have laid down some of the things that we are doing for the Philippines relating to our fight against plastic pollution. So actually, for number one, public solutions relating to EPR law, providing procedures for adjudication of EPR cases is published today. These are two PAB resolutions and draft procedural manual for the implementation regarding compliance monitoring ongoing, soon to be also established in the Philippines. Also, the draft joint administrative circular on incentives is we are continuing our talks with our Department of Finance and also a public consultation. Also for the Philippines, the DNR-EMB continues our capacity building for the informal waste sectors. And the study on non-environmentally acceptable products will continue on our end. And we continue to engage with our with the DFA and the regional groups, Asia Pacific Group specifically, for the next steps on the INC Global Plastics Treaty. That's all for now. Rocky, thank you.
Thank you very much, Attorney Janice, for that very comprehensive and insightful presentation on key issues and potential ways forward from the plastics treaty, not just at the global level, actually, but also at the national level. And that despite all the setbacks that have been happening at this global conversation, there are a lot of bright spots, especially happening at the national level in the Philippines. There are many concrete actions and solutions being adopted and implemented that could be scalable across the countries. So thank you again, Janice. The insights from the exciting and at times really quite challenging, proceedings in the plastics treaty negotiations. We've been here from 2022, now it's 2025. And, with the maxim, you said that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. We'll just wait and see what it will look like in the future, but we hope that it'll come into fruition very soon. So again, thank you very much, Attorney Janice Mamit from the Philippine Environmental Management Bureau. Next, we have our panelists, which will focus on the financing and solutions. We have with us Vigil Yu. Vigil is the Senior Program Officer at Vera, a global nonprofit that develops and manages environmental standards, including the Plastic Waste Reduction Standard. Vigil coordinates Vera's policy engagement and strategic partnerships globally, with a particular focus on Asia. Before Vera, Vigil worked on circular economy and policy advocacy at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in China. Now, let's all welcome Vigil. Thank you very much, Vigil, and you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Rocky, for the introduction and for inviting me to this panel. So hi, everyone. My name is Vigil, and I will be talking about Vera's plastic program and plastic credit and how it works as an innovative financing mechanism for circular solutions. So I'll try to briefly cover introduction to the program, and then I'll discuss the role of plastic credit in the voluntary market and also in the compliance market within the potential future plastic treaty, and also how it can complement EPR, especially for Asian governments. So brief intro of Vera. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 2007. The Verified Carbon Standard is the leading carbon standard in the voluntary carbon market, which is increasingly converging with the compliance market. So building on these expertise and experiences, the plastic waste reduction standard is one of the newer programs we have, and is focused on plastic waste recycling and collection. Essentially, the program has two basic components. One is a plastic waste reduction standard, and it also has supporting methodologies. One is focused on recycling and one is focused on collection. And together they provide a uniform framework for measuring, monitoring, and verifying project impact. And it also has a social and environmental safeguards incorporated within the standard. And for projects that have gone through a third-party audit and have demonstrated their compliance to the standard, can be issued plastic credits by the Vera's plastic program. One plastic credit represents 1 ton of additional plastic waste, either collected from nature or recycled. And so these two credits are distinct, and they represent different environmental outcomes. The benefits from the collection is more about getting the pollution, plastic pollution, away out of nature. And then recycling is more from the circularity perspective, displacing the use of virgin plastics. Just very briefly, this is the overall process. I just want to reiterate, we are a nonprofit and we manage the standard. We're not involved in the project development nor the sales or pricing of the plastic credit at the end. The projects can use our standard and they can demonstrate their compliance through third-party audit. And once their compliance is reviewed and checked by us, and then they will be issued, they can register and issue plastic credits, which will be transparently displayed on Vera's registry. There you will find all of the projects that's under the program and all the essential documents about the program, about the projects. And then businesses can purchase plastic credit to make credible investments into plastic waste management activities. And the funding goes directly back to the project themselves. This is the program at a glance. The program was officially launched in 2021, and currently we have 32 projects registered globally, and altogether there are 60 projects under the program. And I just want to stress 10 of these projects are in the ASEAN region, and 7 of them have already registered. They're mostly in Indonesia, concentrated around Indonesia and Thailand. So very briefly about how plastic credit works in the voluntary market, we are a strong proponent that we believe that both upstream and downstream actions are important for corporate plastic stewardship. Of course, companies should reduce and eliminate unnecessary plastic, redesign and use more recycled content on the upstream. But downstream, they should also contribute to build better infrastructure and support activities on waste management, recycling, and collection. And plastic credit is one of the ways where companies can make a credible investment into this area. An example I want to raise is the World Bank's outcome-based bond that was launched last year. Altogether, it's worth $100 million and has a 7-year maturity period. And 2 projects under Vera's plastic program have received funding benefiting from this bond, and both of the projects are already generating plastic credit, and they will be leveraged to provide return to the investors. 2 projects, one is based in Ghana, one is in Indonesia. The slides will be shared with you afterwards, so feel free to explore and learn more about these projects. They both involve local community members, and they both do collection and recycling of plastic waste. And now we come to the compliance market for plastic credit. First of all, I just want to briefly mention again, as Janice has mentioned, finance is a very key component of the treaty, and that's something there is no conclusion on who should pay for the huge funding gap, especially for the global south to develop plastic waste management infrastructure. And this is a table that's from Intersessional Expert Group. They developed analysis on potential funding sources that can be used to implement the treaty. And so under innovative finance sources, you can find plastic credit and plastic bond and extended producer responsibility. They're all listed under an innovative finance sources that can potentially support implementation of the treaty. And plastic credit can support some possible core obligations of the international legally binding instrument, increase the availability of post-consumer recycled content, improve sound management of plastic waste, and also address the issue of legacy plastic pollution, and also support just transition. And it can also have a role in supporting EPR, which is where I'll spend most of the time of the presentation. So I think most participants would be quite familiar with EPR. It's a very well recognized policy tool, if not the most effective way to direct funding from the private sector to waste management, to have dedicated, ongoing, and sufficient financing. However, many reports or publications are missing that it is actually quite challenging for the emerging markets to develop EPR from scratch. And we have identified these 4 common challenges through our studies that includes underdeveloped waste sector, limited regulatory and administrative capacity, funding deficit for infrastructure, and not being inclusive enough of the informal sector. And based on this outcome, we spent a year to develop this discussion paper that was just published about 3 months ago, where we really dive deeper into the topic. I will take you through some of the findings. So in the report, we used this framework that's actually developed by the World Bank that looks at EPR into 3 different phases. So there's initiation phase, when it's about really putting EPR on political agenda, starting to start these discussions around EPR to build a common vision, start setting goals, and start doing some internal assessment on capacity and potential gaps to implement EPR. And it's quite typical for countries at this stage of EPR to have a voluntary industry-led initiative instead of mandatory one. And this is also a very good time to start setting best practice criteria. And then phase 2 is a transitional phase that's about moving from voluntary EPR to mandatory EPR. And the key task here is to establish a legally binding and enforceable regulatory framework. So the government will play a more important role here to really set the mechanism and to improve the operations. And phase 3 is more about is when the EPR is more or less mature, there is a good level of compliance, and however, there is still need to continue to improve as the market always changes and there is new technology coming to the market. So these are the 3 key common characteristics. And for the report, we did 6 country case studies that across different socioeconomic, political background. And it's about taking a snapshot in the history as EPR development is very dynamic. Many of the countries that we studied have made progress forward or backward in terms of EPR implementation. So phase one, this is really not about assessing a country's performance, but really to use it to really tease out an archetype that other countries can learn from. So for phase one, we looked into Indonesia and Ghana. Phase two, we had Vietnam and Kenya. And phase three, we had Netherlands and Chile. So I'll briefly only talk about phase one and two, as I think is a bit more relevant in the context of today's topic. So for phase one, it's an initiation phase where it's quite typical. The challenge is to not have enough data, or especially not having a clear financing mandate for obligated entities to start paying into the system. And Indonesia is an example of that. There's no clear administrative structure of oversight, but there is a current movement, currently led by the Ministry of Environment, to really revising the regulation and working towards mandatory EPR. And for phase two, we looked into Vietnam, and a common challenge here is a fragmentation in the legal and operational framework, and also still a significant funding gap due to the lack of compliance, as it's common to have this is very common for new compliance mandatory mechanisms. And it's also common to have shortcomings in the waste management infrastructure and a lack of coverage. So in our view, there are three really key elements of EPR. First is financing, really providing finance from especially the private sector to the waste management operators, and then to improve their operation, especially to also consider integrating the informal waste sector. And then administration is more relying on the government to really set the mechanism in place and the framework to make sure that compliance is tracked and the investment outcome is also tracked. And there are five components of the PASSIVE program that can really feed into that and be complementary. PASSIVE credit can act as a funding instrument on its own and is result-based. And the program is also underpinned by a globally applicable accounting, monitoring, and reporting framework. There is also a stakeholder engagement and mandatory environmental and social safeguards in place as part of the standard. We also mandate third-party audit, and there is also a public registry system where everything is transparently listed and accessible to the public. And I just want to go through some key system benefits. So for phase one, the key benefits is to demonstrate best practice. So waste operators and projects can try to register with our program, and then they will learn how to operate in line with social and environmental safeguards and use a very robust monitoring, reporting, and verification procedures, and demonstrate impacts with a third-party audited outcome. And for phase two is about posted performance. So PASSIVE credit can be leveraged to ensure that financial contributions are result-based. And it also provides this compliance framework that's ready to be used, and also the digital infrastructure, especially the registry that government can use and reduce their burden, their regulatory burden. There are three overall key benefits that we have identified of integrating PASSIVE credit into EPR systems. Enable finance, align financing sources into highly impactful projects, and to boost operations, expand infrastructure and waste collection and recycling activities, and strengthen administration as we have the framework in place and digital infrastructure in place that can be leveraged by the government. I won't go into the details. I know we're short on time. And so this is a further breakdown of the three main categories of benefits. You are free to scan the QR code and read the full paper. And also, we also did a webinar where we went into a lot more depth on the paper's findings. And also, please feel free. There are many engagement options. Feel free to engage with us. And we also provide technical capacity building workshops to support governments to learn more about how our program functions. And we are really keen to collaborate on a country-specific initiative to help countries develop efficient EPR systems and help them to leverage our existing program. And this is our program's email, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Virgil, for that enlightening presentation and the fantastic job of you know, discussing it within 15 minutes, especially highlighting the role of plastic credits that can be used both in voluntary and the compliance market and financial mechanisms. You mentioned the outcome-based bonds, for example, which are very important to fill in the huge finance gap existing today to eliminate plastic pollution and redirecting, financing towards the global south where assistance and funding is needed the most. Thank you, Vigil. There are two things that struck me, in your discussion that plastic credits in itself can support really the core obligations of the treaty later on for implementation. And as we know, it's used in catalyzing and scaling for now, waste collection and recycling more downstream, but there's a need to, scale it up and to use it for more upstream measures as well. And I think that's the goal also of the treaty to cover the whole life cycle of plastics. And of course, especially the extended producer responsibility schemes and how's that being done. There's the great report that Vera has produced, and we can also share that as EPR is like a key fiscal and regulatory instrument that's being used by countries and is currently under discussion as well in the plastics treaty negotiations. And there are a lot of initiatives and examples where we can look to optimize efficiency and effectiveness of this EPR regulations, and we can learn from each other as well. So thank you for sharing those insights, Vigil. And I see also that there are a lot of questions coming in, so please keep them coming, and we'll go through the Q&A shortly. But for now, let's proceed to our third panelist, Gilan Devalon. Gilan is the Senior Infrastructure Finance Specialist on Climate Financing at the Asian Development Bank with the Southeast Asia Department. Gilan leads the sovereign policy loan programs in Indonesia and the Philippines to support blue economy development, solid waste management policy frameworks, as well as the reduction of plastic pollution and coastal and marine ecosystems protection. Gilan, welcome. Thank you very much for being here, and over to you.
Thank you, Rocky. Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone as well. While we understood that the INC have not produced yet the agreement that we all expected, mine was to give you an idea of what ADB as a multilateral development bank could do to help and support countries in ASEAN, which are showing a lot of momentum. And this is to illustrate Indonesia and the Philippines moves in the last few years that ADB has supported. Maybe first an overview of at global or regional level figures and metrics that have already been given, but it's always good to have an idea of what we are talking about. 150 million tons of plastic already in the world ocean. Here you have a picture of the Pacific garbage patch. A further 250 million tons will be added by 2050 if trends continue. So in a sense, plastic waste use is expected to triple by 2060, and that will outpace waste management infrastructure capacities, and that will lead to doubling the leakage into the environment, coastal and marine waterways, but also terrestrial. So that will result in degradation of marine and coastal environment. Not only that, it will undermine human livelihoods, human economic revenues, damage health, and exacerbate the flooding. That's why a whole lot of nations were currently negotiating a global plastic treaty, and this is still going on. As a whole, the plastic life cycle contributes to almost 3.5 of global GHG emissions from raw material to polymerization, production, transport, and then waste management. This is quite significant. Regionally, People's Republic of China, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, and Thailand are responsible for nearly 50% of the world's marine plastic pollution. ASEAN has taken steps here. Before COVID, ASEAN framework of action on marine debris, then a regional action plan. Not really given a huge momentum so far, but it has been rekindled by the GPT ambition. Now, what is Indonesia doing, and what are we trying to do to support these moves? Indonesia has a presidential regulation dating back 2018 that envisioned to reduce by 70% the plastic marine debris by 2025 in 7 years. This is huge and ambitious. As one of the largest contributor of plastic marine debris, this is something that has come to the attention of the decision maker, not only for economic but also for social interest. You can see here in the graph, but obviously the data on metrics could be debated. But mainly you have the main trends here. 7.8 million tons of plastic waste generated yearly, out of which 40% are collected and managed, and 60% are uncollected. Uncollected being dumped in open burning or dumped in dump sites, 10% into waterways on marine environment, but also part of the collected plastic waste could also be prone to mismanagement afterwards. When it's being dumped again in non-sanitary landfill. This is the overview, and 80%, and that's very interesting metrics here in italic. 80% of plastic debris is land-based in Indonesia. So when we address the source of the plastic marine debris at land, we will also address the outcome in the waterways and ocean. Maybe the next one, please. The effect of unmanaged plastic waste. Here, this is schematic, but obviously air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. 6.8% of the country's emissions are coming from the waste sector. This is quite significant after obviously the energy sector and the agriculture and forestry sector. Women and children are predominantly impacted by burning of waste at households, but also at dumping sites. Second, economics. Damage to fishing industries, fishing resources, but also damage to tourism, recreational sectors are huge. In addition to that, marine biodiversity is strongly impacted through ingestion, suffocation, and entanglement. You can see here on the picture of plastics or microplastics, which are entering the food chain. I think everyone knows that now. The food chain is being entered by microplastics. You have some metrics here of the impacts in terms of economics annually on tourism, also on the ocean economy. Now, the third part is also something that we are witnessing like weekly, blocking waterways. The plastic are exacerbating the impact of natural disasters and climate change. Flooding are being multiplied by plastics choking into the waterways in rural, but also in urban areas. You see here the cost of flooding that can be easily incremented every year. That's for the effect. So what did we do? We used this overarching institutional framework, quite strong presidential decree. That's the highest, but for a law, this is the highest regulation we can think of, and we decided to support that. We, meaning ADB, but also some bilateral development bank, the French and the German, and we divided our work around policy around three pillars. The first one, the whole life cycle of waste management service. The second one, trying to reduce the production and the consumption of avoidable plastic or problematic plastic. And the third one around data and monitoring, because this is so important when it comes to policy making. The first one, to be very quick, is around creating the waste services as mandatory basic service. As we speak, the local government in Indonesia cannot allocate more than 0.3 in average percent of their budget to waste services. Obviously, that leads performing investments. It was also about to use on to incentivize the performing waste bank, which is a unique feature of Indonesia in terms of collecting, segregating, and recycling waste in the country. The second pillar, when we talk about plastic production and consumption reduced, it's about involuntary. It's about initiating an EPR mechanism, as Vigil just said before. This is an initiation phase in Indonesia, a voluntary EPR for now. It doesn't call for an EPR, it doesn't title it EPR yet, but we are getting there. Also trying to ban or restrict single-use plastic all over the country, and to incentivize recycling, but also reuse and refill initiatives, which are really spreading all over the country. The third one was around data and monitoring. As we said, there are some debate around the around the matrix. So the whole thing helped us to bring together the government action at national and local level, which is so important when it comes to a country like Indonesia. Maybe a second focus on the Philippines now. After we did that in 2024, and that will be the next slide, please. We looked into the Philippines, which has a very powerful framework. We talked about the EPR law, which has been issued in 2022 and regulated in 2023. Here you can see on the graph the main trends of the plastic waste generated. So around 2 million tons of plastic waste generated. That obviously is also debatable, but what is not is a breakdown. 50% of it isn't collected, and 50% of it is not collected. The uncollected part is going to terrestrial pollution, to open burning, or to aquatic pollution, waterways and ocean. The collected part is only ending in recycling in the magnitude of 10% of the whole total, which is already a good amount, but not enough. The rest is being landfilled in sanitary landfills or not necessarily sanitary. On what's remaining is left on the sites that also are prone to leaking into the environment. That's the overview in the Philippines that decided us also to try and support the implementation of the EPR. So what we did in the Philippines, the next slide, please, Gian. We embedded this EPR implementation into a broader blue policy work with 3 pillars. You can see the second pillar is the one around plastic and solid waste, but the first one is around some flagship other policies, integrated coastal management that touches upon obviously solid waste management at some point and pollution. So the second one is plastic. The third one is around natural capital accounting and investment in natural capital strengthen, which might be impacted very significantly by plastic and plastic waste. So this is about implementing core flagship laws in the country, which is very much advanced in terms of regulatory framework. We are doing that with the French AFD and the German KfW, and with many implementing agencies, the first of one being the Department of Environment and Natural Resources from Attorney Janice. Maybe the next one. Just to focus in this very last slide on what we want to support with this policy work. As I said again, the policy, the regulatory framework is unprecedented. We are talking about an EPR that has been established in 2022. We also are talking about an Ecological Solid Waste Management Act dating back 2020. This Management Act is giving responsibility to the municipalities at the very at the very local level to collect, segregate, recycle, and transport waste, municipal solid waste. Now, the EPR is coming into play with obliged enterprises, obligated enterprises, producers, and with a very strong and ambitious objective by 2028 to reduce by 80% their footprint in plastic packaging, 80%. As we speak, 2023 and 2024, these obliged enterprises in a universe of 1,000 have already been complying with those obligations. This is commendable. This is remarkable. But we just need to support implementation of few gaps in this remarkable piece of legislation. So we are talking about the EPR registry, the procedural manual. We are talking about SUP, so phasing out non-acceptable plastics and fostering recycling. We are talking about linking the local government units work to the producers' work. How can they work together? There's kind of a hiatus here, and we need to fill this out. And we are obviously talking about informal waste sectors, workers, which are paramount in this country, like in many other countries in ASEAN, in collecting, segregating, and recycling plastic waste without insurance, without social benefits. So those 4 aspects were, I'm sorry, were addressed during this policy framework preparation. This is a programmatic approach. You can see 2023, 2025, and we will, while I speak to you today, we are starting to implement the second phase of this program, which will be more in implementation of gaps that we have identified with the government, with alternative to SUP when it comes to tax or ban single-use plastic. We need to think about alternative to single-use plastic. What kind of new industries or non-plastic substitute can we think about? How can we incentivize those industries? And the informal waste sector workers, there is a NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution Action Plan, but after the plan, there is implementation. This is where we want to get at on the right-hand side, outcome indicators to reduce the annual plastic leakage into the ocean and by 260,000 tons per year. This is the government commitment. That's quite huge. To reduce, to ensure that 80% of annual plastic footprint will be recovered and diverted by 2028. That's quite a challenge. And to increase the number of obliged enterprises registering their own EPR schemes. The covering of waste sector workers, the figures here are kind of debatable as well, but we want to cover as much as we can. This is what we want to do and what we are trying to do with this policy work. In addition to the discussion around the Global Plastic Treaty, I wanted to show you here that those countries are not waiting for the GPT to be agreed upon to align their own framework to this international agreement. They are making moves. They are taking action, and I think this is quite a role to accompany them. Back to you, Rocky. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilan, for that excellent presentation, on the tremendous and very remarkable work that ADB is doing for support for governments and countries across the region. So these are sovereign policy loans providing support to governments in regulations, institutional frameworks, monitoring and compliance, the entirety, of the enabling conditions that are needed to ensure, proper solid waste management and anti-plastic pollution in each of these jurisdictions. So these are very important for the development of the policy and implementation of existing ones, but it will also be very important for the implementation of the Plastics Treaty later on. But as Gilan said, countries are already doing a lot of concrete action now, despite the delays and the setbacks in the global conversation. Now, thanks, Gilan, for discussing Indonesia. We started with Indonesia on the marine debris program and how that covers not just like plastic waste management system, but all the way to monitoring and compliance. And now, with the exciting developments in the program for the Philippines on the implementation of the Extended Producer Responsibility Law. A relatively new law. It's been like 3 years and needs support for implementation, especially in the policy work, covering not just the overall EPR registry and procedures and the manuals, but also like at the granular level, local government units, support for them and how they can comply with these laws and policies in place. So again, thank you very much, Gilan from ADB for that presentation. And at this point, I'd like to thank all the panelists for their insightful presentations, spurring a lot of interest from our participants. And I can see that there's a lot of questions here, and please keep them coming. We will proceed there in a while. But at this point, we turn to our panel of reactors to have a quick chat on the discussion, especially on the finance and investment side, operational realities of enterprises and what's happening on the ground and what support might be needed. So I'll call on two of our reactors at the stage. First is Diane Kurniawati. Diane is the dynamic force steering the ship at 3D Oasis Group and Alba 3D Plastics Recycling Indonesia. She founded PT3D Oasis, a plastics recycling company based in Tangerang, and then set up a new joint venture company with Alba Group Asia under the name Alba 3D Plastics Recycling for recycled PET food grade facility in Java, Indonesia. So thanks, Diane. And I'll call on another reactor with us. We have Aurore Lambert. Aurora is an infrastructure and corporate finance specialist with experience across banking and risk management across Asia. She serves as the consultant for the Asian Development Bank, where she leads climate-related private sector initiatives to accelerate green growth. So I'll call on Diane and Aurora with us, and I'll start with Diane. A lot of insightful
Hello.
presentations. Thanks, Diane. And I want to know what your thoughts are, especially with your perspective with enterprise on the ground in Indonesia and what the needs are, especially within all the things that are happening at the global and national level. So over to you, Diane.
Okay, thanks, Rocky, and thanks for all the panelists for the inspiring presentation. For me, there are a few things, like three main things. The first one is from private sector and recycling operator point of view. I think the first point for us, the important point, is how this regulation, either this treaty or even the EPR regulation, can unlock the demand for us as a recycling industry, because as everyone know, for example, like this past quarters is very challenging for recycling industries because of the drop price and drop demand in the recycling sectors. And we all know that many plastic recyclers are closing down there in Europe because of this demand. And I think plastic recycling here is very, it's a mathematical problem, you know, like it's either our raw material costs plus our production costs can less than the selling price, then we can create the profit. So how then these regulations can help us to unlock this demand? It's either to increase the quantity of our selling product through the minimum plastic recycle content regulation, or even to other financing opportunities like plastic credit selling, for example, that can help company to survive. And then the second one, I think, is through the, I see here is very good, you know, that ASEAN countries can collaborate, then probably can have like harmonized EPR regulation, or because I see several countries already advanced in the EPR and other countries are still developing, for example, like Indonesia. So ASEAN can be the bridge, how then these ASEAN countries can have harmonized regulation in terms of the EPR, and also harmonized regulation of the recycling product, especially on the collection side. So then become our ASEAN recyclers can become more competitive in the international market, like EU market, that now really demand on this traceability product. So it's not only the quality of final product, but also the traceability of the sourcing, which in these ASEAN countries, all of us are mostly informal sectors and less regulated, less traceable. So having that harmonized regulation can help us. The last one is on the closing the financing gap, which that I think ADB here and ASEAN maybe can help also to close that gap, not only to find the funding, but how to make the existing fund smarter enough, you know, on the implementation side to create the real impact in the grassroots sector. The execution partners or execution actors like informal waste collections and so on. So those three things, I think, Rocky, from my end. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, Diana. Excellent. Three things. Very easy to remember. I like what you said. Unlocking demand for these industries. Recycling is one, despite all the challenges. And this would be the impetus to unlocking. The regulations would be the impetus to unlocking more demand for these kinds of industries, which are important for the life cycle of plastics. And then harmonizing regulations in ASEAN. And this is what we're trying to do here, to discuss, to have more of these discussions on the regional approach to harmonizing standards and regulations, as well as closing the financing gap. So great points, Diane. Thank you very much for that. And now we go to Aurora to discuss more on private sector and her insights on ADB's perspective. Go ahead, Aurora.
Yes, hi. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting me as a reactor. I'm very keen to share our experience to date in the sector. So we have looked completely at projects that are in Southeast Asia in different countries. And I think the key takeaway I would like to tell everyone is EPR works. And the reason why I say EPR works is because we've seen it work in developed countries, in Europe, and in the Americas. And the reason why I want to mention it works is two things. One, it's not an effort in vain, and we should keep pushing government to keep legislating and implementing those laws. And second, as a concrete proof, we can see that those Asian players that have started to really enter the recycling industry and to recycle those PET plastic bottles, they do sell a large amount of their production actually to Europe and the Americas because there is a strong demand. Again, this strong demand coming from EPR. So I think here, the fact that Asian countries are willing to implement the similar type of policies will help continuing the effort and is a good realistic policies that will drive result in those countries. So I know it's the key countries right now are really Philippines, Indonesia, I would say Singapore and Vietnam that are really either implemented or legislated EPR. And there needs to widen the scope, to consolidate, and to also include within those policy framework other elements. I mean, policy is nice, but they have to be implemented. It's not just a question of enacting a law. All the stakeholders need to be engaged, and there is a strong need for financing from the private sector. And this is where ADB has a key role to play. This is part of the mission of ADB. And another element is to make sure that the informal waste sector in Southeast Asia is incorporated. This is something which is kind of a specificity of Southeast Asia versus the success that we've seen in Europe or in the Americas, where this is a formal recycling industry. In Southeast Asia, this is an informal waste sector. This is working well, but it needs to be consolidated. It needs to improve and stabilize this supply, and so it needs to come from the demand. So the more the demand grows, the more the supply chain will be improved and stabilized. So those are maybe some key elements I wanted to mention.
Thank you very much also, Aurora, for those excellent points. And great to know that EPR works from your practice on the ground. You know, these EPR frameworks, regulations really set the enabling conditions, you know, for all these things that, you know, the interventions for plastic waste management across jurisdictions. It's great to see that they are, you know, spurring impacts on the ground. So these are realistic policy that you said that are really driving results on the ground. And that's what we want to see, like action impacts on the ground by spurring financing from the private sector, as what ADB has been doing, and also improving the conditions of the informal waste sector. Very important in this conversation. So thank you, Diane and Aurora, for those interventions. Great points. I would like now to call on our panelists, Gilan, Janice, Attorney Janice, and Vigil back on the screen with us to have more of a discussion and a chat. I'd like to, you know, really note that thank you for everyone for keeping the time. We have a lot of time actually to have more of a discussion, and that's great because we do have a lot of questions and interests from our participants here. So Ken, everyone's here. So maybe I'll start off with some questions on financing. And there were a couple of questions, so I'll lump them into one. In terms of financing for developing countries, especially in the discussions for the plastics treaty, the questions from Derek Casio is that, is there a consensus on where the financing might go to? And in these discussions, I'll just add on that what financing mechanisms are being discussed that would be available to support the implementation of the treaty and to meet access to access private sector funding. So this is addressed to everyone on the financing and what might where this financing should go to, and what financial mechanisms could be tapped to fill this financing gap. So anyone wants to take a stab?
Start maybe, Rocky, if this is okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Yulan.
We are not short of financing options on modalities. Even if the Global Plastic Treaty is not yet agreed upon, there are many initiatives that are showing some results. EPR working, has been said by Aurora and the other speakers, in countries where the regulatory framework is in place, the incentives are also in place for the enterprises. Some penalties for enforcement are in place as well. An EPR fund might be differentiated according to the country's approach. What we will get after the GPT is being agreed is probably some kind of mainstream EPR special fund, maybe or maybe not. In the meantime, there are many ways for an EPR to work without this kind of overarching guidelines. The private sector. The private sector is obviously the answer, but as Budian said, for the private sector to be interested, they need to have feedstock, they need to have this recycled content, they need to have security over that feedstock, or they will not get into this waste management industry, which is highly capital intensive and highly risky in terms of business model. So this is for the regulator to do that. It's not about financial. Now, plastic credits, for example, is a very fancy and interesting innovative way to progress towards downstream strategies. That will not replace downstream infrastructure investment. So that's something else that banks, commercial banks, the development banks should do as well, is to private, traditional loan funding to private project proponents like PT Alba in Indonesia to create their recycling industries. But innovative financing should be something that we as bank could incentivize with some kind of a kickstart that might be missing at this point.
Great. Thanks, Gilan. You mentioned innovative financing, and that's been a recurrent theme, I think, in the conversations, not just the Plastics Treaty, but throughout the national policy reforms and what financing is needed. So anyone else on thoughts on innovative financing or financial mechanisms from your experience on the ground as well? None?
Rocky.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
Regarding the question on financing, for the plastics treaties, I actually answered some of the questions, but um, the Global Plastics Treaty was it is aiming to tap the GF, the Global Environment Facility Fund, which is existing now. But there was also discussion on a new dedicated multilateral fund. However, at that during the negotiations, and the proposed treaty, the last proposed text did not mention any timeline for the establishment of that dedicated fund. So it might still be a long journey for this financial mechanism under the Global Plastics Treaty.
Great. Thank you, Attorney Janice, for flagging that discussion. There's always been the discussions on what financial mechanism would be used to implement the plastics treaty. So the Global Environment Facility has always been, there as an option, as an existing facility, but there's actually a lot of clamor, especially from developing countries, to have a dedicated fund really to address, the issues of the plastics treaty itself. And we'll see how it plays out, especially in the next negotiation rounds. But thanks for flagging that. So yes, I think that's good for financing, unless anyone wants to say something. All right, Vigil, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just quickly jump in. As far as we know, the financing options didn't really get a thorough discussion because I think the key topic was really to agree on production cap and these kind of topics. And I think sitting at Vera, as we are very plugged into the carbon world, I think there are some lessons learned from the climate negotiations. As we know, the Paris Agreement has been in place for a long time, and finance is still not resolved, where this is something that's still constantly being negotiated. And there is, however, the positive is the voluntary carbon market is increasingly getting plugged into the conversation. There's entire Article 6 that's focused on regulating the carbon market to use it as a financing mechanism. So we can hope, maybe just hopefully the companies don't wait for the treaty to be fully in place to start investing. Hopefully they can start to act now. As Gilan also said, there are many solutions out there. It's just a lack of will to really make things happen.
Yes, thank you, Visual. Great point. There are a lot of lessons that can be learned from the carbon markets and the carbon, frameworks. What's good, the thing I learned most about like in these discussions is that aside compared to carbon, you have plastics, which is more of a tangible resource that you can see if it's being collected, recycled, you can really see the impact of it's being removed from the environment, whereas, others might be more difficult to measure because of its intangible nature, like such as carbon. But yeah, thank you for flagging those issues. So again, thank you very much for your insights on finance. I'll go back to you, Vigil, because there's a lot of questions here actually, relating to plastic credits. And one particular theme that stood out is, what are the prospects for adopting technology, specifically blockchain technology and AI for plastic credits? So if you have any insights here, some points raised here, AI can be integrated with technologies like blockchain to track waste streams, for example, digital badges, compliance reporting for ESG requirements, all these things. So if you have any thoughts on that, Vigil, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's definitely interesting. I think we're definitely open for it. That's an aspect that plugs more into the auditing aspect, which is usually firstly done by the third-party auditors. So I think we would welcome this kind of solutions to be piloted in some projects, and then that's something we can highlight and maybe try to, if that works well, maybe that's something we can find ways to integrate. But it's still emerging market. Plastic credit in general is still in an emerging market. So is AI. But we're really excited to see the possibilities. Hopefully that can streamline the process.
Yeah, that's quite exciting, especially as the safeguards, as well as, third-party validation and verification of all the reports. So that might play a huge role, especially with all the developments in AI and blockchain technology that we have now. So thank you, Vigil. Some questions here about the dynamics in the plastics treaty negotiations. Maybe I'll ask Attorney Janice to give her, insights and her experience if on the negotiations itself. Would it be possible for ASEAN countries to negotiate as a bloc? And the positions of Southeast Asian countries and COBC countries, how has it been so far, and how united has our front been in terms of negotiations, and how that might look like in the future. So maybe Janice.
Yes, okay. I might be cut short. I think my internet connection is unstable, but if you can still hear me loud and clear.
Yes, we hear you loud and clear, Janice.
There are member states, Asian countries that are really there were some discussions that they have specific stand on some, especially for those oil producing countries. So I'll not be specific on the name of the country, but these are oil producing countries that would not want uh, will just dwell on plastic pollution than the life cycle of plastic will have an effect on the upstream.
Hello. Sorry, I think we lost Attorney Janice for a bit.
Are
Okay,
really
go ahead.
let's say Okay, for all producing countries, they have a specific stand on some measures. So they want to limit it on plastic pollution only. For the we have an Asia Pacific group, what we call
Mm-hmm.
APG. And I actually checked on the resolution uploaded, and it was actually the Philippines was asked to um comment on the COBC joint regional statement. But I'm not sure if the other countries have given, because it's the COBC secretariat who consolidated the joint regional statement. But during the bureau discussion, so there were some discussions. That's why it might be difficult to come up with one Asia Pacific Group regional statement. Depends on the topic up for discussion.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Attorney Janice. Yes, a lot of, dynamics and behind the scenes that are happening in the negotiations, and that's the challenge, really, quite the challenge, because there are quite differing positions that need to be, a bridge so that I think it's a challenge for the next few negotiating rounds, if at all. So we'll have to see how that plays out in the future rounds. So thank you again, Janice. Now I have a question, a very practical question on, the discussions about EPR and integration international laws and frameworks. So I might ask, like, how do you think EPR can be integrated into like existing extended producer responsibility frameworks across Southeast Asia, how that might look like. And as a follow on to that is if it's if there's a possibility to actually harmonize national EPR frameworks across the region. For here, logically, it would be ASEAN. So is there, some examples that might have happened at the regional level? So I'll go there. First start with the national frameworks on integrating plastic credits into EPR and then harmonizing at the regional level. So who might want to answer on this?
May
Visual? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Janice, please jump in. I saw there are some questions about the EPR in the Philippines as well. I left a question by Joseph. To answer here, as far as I know, in the Philippines, the EPR already incorporate plastic credit, and especially the only kind of difference with our program is the current EPR focus on recovery, which is actually more or less equivalent to our plastic waste collection credit, but we have a separate one on recycling. And from what I've heard, the government is realizing that incentives are needed for recycling as well. So there are discussions around maybe incorporating a recycling target as well. And so then our plastic waste recycling credit would then be a really good fit for the scenario in the Philippines as well. Please correct me if my understanding is inaccurate, Janice. And I'll just quickly answer about the harmonization. I think that's one of the advantage of an independent program like ours. We have a globally applicable framework. I've shown in the map where the projects are located, basically spread across 6 different continents. So there's evidence that it can be used in different contexts, in different scenarios. However, we do realize some requirements might be very high. We've heard that from project proponents are really difficult for them to reach in terms of feasibility. But that's something we are open to discuss. It's a new program, and we are open to discuss with governments and to see what's the best way to integrate for its compliance views. Please, Janice, I jumped ahead of you.
Thank you, Visual. Any other thoughts?
Yes, Rocky, just to add, actually, there were instances when we have regional workshops. When and there was a training that I attended that they were asking for EPR laws in the Philippines, and some of these countries wanted to duplicate our policy. So they were actually asking if it is effective here in the Philippines because it's barely new, and then they wanted to duplicate it in their country. So that was, I think, last year, and I think in two more training or workshops that some of the EMB personnel have attended. That's their way forward on the EPR that they want
Mm-hmm.
to go through go through. So I think it's a welcome idea that these countries are also open to implementation of the EPR, but they wanted to know the how effective it is. So that's why we really have to. And for example, last year, so we were just able to audit around for the 2023. That's 20%. So
Mm-hmm.
but they are already those who are obliged enterprises have submitted their audit reports, and they all have complied. So at
Right.
least we have their compliance. We already With their compliance, we already have implemented a 20% recovery of
Mm.
this rigids and flexible products, which was not there if the EPR did not was not established. So it's already a good start. So when we got the audit reports now, it's already also compliant. So it's a nice it's a good way forward. And also for the other countries, if they will be asking us, then we can say that it is implementable at the very least.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Janice. No, those are great points, on the EPR implementation and the great progress that has been made in reaching the targets, and that it actually works. And there are a lot of opportunities to scale this up further, especially here in the region, especially in Southeast Asia, where there is momentum on EPR. We have countries like Vietnam and the Philippines having the legal frameworks for that, but other countries are also taking a lot of interest on EPR, making it more mandatory, and all those things, and all those initiatives. So I'll go to Gilan. On your thoughts, Gilan, as a follow through?
Yes, thank you, Rocky. I have a mixed response to this question. It's good to harmonize as a French, obviously, and that will not surprise you. It's good to harmonize from central to local level
Mm-hmm.
and from regional aspects, but a differentiated approach is always welcome. For
Mm-hmm.
example, what we see in the Philippines, what we see in Vietnam, the scope of the EPR is not exactly the same. Here in the Philippines, this is plastic waste packaging. In Indonesia, for the time being, it's only a few rigid flexible straws, SUP. In Vietnam, it expanded to lubricants, to e-waste. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Tony Janice, here already in the Philippines, you are thinking about expanding before even it goes to the end of 2028. So it's really a differentiated approach, depending on the categorization of waste in the country. What's more prevailing, or what do you want to address first? What is very, very admirable that it works. So we have to start somewhere, and when it's being implemented, then you can expand. That's really what I think our lessons learned are from other countries like Korea or Europe, who implemented that a few years ago. You will see that there is no harmonized approach at all. And those
Mm-hmm.
countries were not blessed enough to have the plastic credit already there as a downstream strategy. It didn't exist, but it worked for different aspects. We on different areas. So not necessarily an harmonized approach. Differentiated approach is nice with core elements. And obviously, plastic has no boundaries. And the plastic, when it's being addressed in Indonesia, could very well, if it's not addressed, could very well float towards other countries and vice versa. So we need a framework on guidelines that are being
Right.
harmonized. Same definition of plastics, same definition of chemical of concern, and then we address them.
No, that's a great point on differentiated approach according to, the conditions of each country, the different circumstances of each country, as well as the needs. But it's also important, it's also useful actually to see the lessons learned from other countries and take what we can learn from them and apply them in our respective jurisdictions. I think that's also like a good point that we can consider in this, regional approach and coordination and learning from each other. So again, next, Aurora, I'll go over to you.
Yeah, I mean, there was kind of in the similar idea. I fully agree that when we say the word harmonization, for me, it's it's the direction. It's aiming for the same direction, but every country has a different. It has different stage, we said, of implementation of different type of law and of willingness to move forward. And so I think if I were to think of something else that could be a parallel, would be the national determination contributions, the NDC that we have in the GHG, which what I mean by that is each country could have their own timeline with their own targets, again, with the aim of a specific deadline and target to allow each country to customize a plan that would work with the constraint of their own country, the level of pollution, the type of different plastics that we're talking about. And I think that would work. Again, the reason why I said work is taking again the example of the EPR. The EPR in Americas or in Europe have their differences. The EPR in Vietnam works. I mean, the project for which on which we work, this is an existing operating company, and they do get revenues out of EPR in Vietnam. It's still small, but it works. So it's really a question of allowing each country to customize something that would yield results.
Yes. Thanks, Aurora. That's a great point. Customizing and, making it tailor fit for the conditions and circumstances of each country. And, the NDC example is a great one. Each country has a different stage. So yeah, that's something that we can look at further as well. I'll go on this question, and I might ask Dion and Aurora for this, especially on your experience on the ground, because the question was, what mechanisms can be established to ensure that informal waste sectors, the informal waste sector, can be integrated more formally into the circular economy system, and this might mean, in the policy framework, in the EPR, or in general in all the in the general circular economy framework in the places where you're working at. So if you have any thoughts, maybe Dion and Aurora, I'll start with you first. Go, Dion.
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, it's a very very great question because we all are still working on it. Yeah, as more than 60% of our raw material sourcing right now is run by informal sectors, especially in Indonesia or other Southeast Asia countries. I think the inclusion can be through the EPR regulation. And one of the thing that for me that can trigger or can make it smoother is the use of technology on that. So how to make this collection is traceable, and the use of technology can make this inclusion of this informal sector make it easier and also traceable. So for example, in our case, last time we have one of our buyer require us to provide, let's say, traceable materials, and then they install an app through our collection center, like our tier 1 up to tier 3 suppliers, using the blockchain technology, and also to then later on enable us to provide incentive to the collectors up to the tier 3. And I see that through this inclusion, to this utilization of digitalization can help the inclusion of informal waste sector, and also easier to standardize even the process or the framework. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Digitalization to promote and ensure inclusion is being used already, and there's so many prospects for that. Thank you,
Yeah, we
Dion,
just
for
need to
giving those examples.
roll it out. I
Roll
think
it
the
out.
importance to create small pilot projects to show the solution works, and then can roll it out, and digitalization can make it more efficient.
Great point. Thank you, Diane. Digitalization to roll out and scale it up further. Aurora?
Yeah, for me, I'm gonna be a bit more down to earth, I would say. For me, the way I look at it is there needs to be incentive. So for this to work, I mean, why would you wake up in the morning and go pick up the bottle? That's so I think there are a few things. One, you have informal and formal. I think there needs to be some more homogenization between both and some support from government to do that. Second, there needs to be regulation, but it cannot be too burdensome. Why? Because again, this is mostly driven by the informal sector, so they need to remain incentivized to do the collection. And third, there is this element of financing, and the financing means infrastructure, which ultimately infrastructure can become technology, to make sure it's easier, faster, and more reliable. And in terms of financing, it's also a question of monetary financing for those pickers and collectors to make sure that there is a bare minimum, so they are incentivized again to build a very stable supply, because the issue could be the lack of stability. So some form of support from most likely the government to ensure that depending on the volatility of the different price to produce plastic, to produce virgin PET or other type of implicit competition that would create volatility in the price, allowing some form of subsidy to make sure that the collection remain very stable.
Right. Great points. So incentives and streamlining the process make it not burdensome. I think that's important in this context for informal waste sectors and the financing that is needed. Or thank you very much for that. I'll go to this one question, and it's quite related, especially to the colleagues in the Asian Development Bank. The question here is that how are banks, ADB in particular, how are you ensuring that the highest standards of environmental protection, environmental safeguards are being applied to private sector partners, especially in investments in this space and within the countries in Southeast Asia, perhaps? So, could you share more about that on the frameworks and the standards, safeguards in place?
I don't know if you intend for me to answer, but I will gladly do. And when it comes to policy work, we are not financing infrastructure, we're not financing projects themselves. We rely on national regulations to be rolled out, to be complied with, which obviously they are. We do have safeguards measures that we apply for projects, and we expect those measures to be known by your counterparts. But for policy loan, that's very difficult to impose on counterparts. Some guidelines that are a bit different, or that would create some kind of monitoring or reporting aspect that are not embedded in the instrument itself. Having said that, obviously, when we talk about informal waste sector or gender, this is not for just inserting this into our framework of action. This is because here, as we all say, that this is predominant feature of the sector, and this is also where the most vulnerable part of the population are working and suffering from the same item. So we ought to do something, and we have the instruments to coordinate or align national frameworks. When we do in project like Petalba, but I would prefer Diane to say we are asking the client to implement at least ADB safeguards when they are compliant with national framework, which is the case in Indonesia. When there are some discrepancies, they are being filled with some technical assistance, some pilot areas, or maybe some policy standards, policy work. This is the ADB mandate to kind of revise or propose amendment of policies when together with the government we think there are some gaps to be filled. That's what I would think about this question.
Thank you, Gilan. Great points there, Gilan. Anyone else? Because like we only have 2 minutes, and I just want to have this one question for everyone. The last question before we wrap up is, do you have any examples or experience on behavioral action? Because there's a lot of clamor here asking for like how can this be, how these frameworks can be translated into actions that empower media, youth, communities to drive change and address the issues of plastic pollution. So, just any thoughts on the connection between the policy and investment and behavioral action?
Many thoughts on that. I talked about West Bank in Indonesia. This is a very predominant aspect of that. We are talking about Southeast Asia population, very young population. When we address those populations through digital ways, social media, we can hit a nerve. Definitely. So we can use celebrities to convey messages. When one message is inadvertently becoming viral, we have won. But we don't know how
Right.
to find these ways. But yeah, let's use those channels that are new to us now to kind of propagate this behavioral change if we can.
Exactly, Gilan. Thank you. No, Aurora?
Yeah, me, I would go for the role models. I think for me, role models work best. And when I say role models, I'm thinking um, very well-known sports people. So in each country, I don't know, I would go for the cricket champion in India. I would go for a super soccer player in Europe. I would target whoever could be a lead role model, because sports speak to everyone. And I don't know,
Right.
it's very energizing, it's very positive. There's no one who can blame on saying this could be viral, or this, there is no thinking, because sometimes the multimedia, there's kind of a double-edged sword, and so people might hesitate to use it. I feel that some role model could really benefit. And the reason I mentioned that is because actually I was listening to a podcast yesterday of a soccer player in Spain who's been doing that, consuming less, consuming no plastic, taking a bike instead of, and is earning millions. And
Right.
that's
So
how, and I think that's, for me, that speaks.
thank you. Yeah, great point, Aurora, for inspiration also. Diane?
Yeah, so I think integrating the behavior change in the school, starting from the kids, like primary schools or even kindergarten, and also in the family itself. And then just one point, Rocky, that I wanted to mention is also involving the brands itself, like the producers, especially to, let's say, redesign the recyclability of the product. And I
Right.
think that we can utilize them to market in the marketing itself, right?
Yep.
That's how the importance of being more sustainably, starting from their packaging.
Right. And we all have to work together for
Exactly.
all
Yeah.
this huge problem. Everyone
Yeah.
has a stake and everyone has to,
Correct.
responsibility for it as well. So any last thoughts also from Vigil and Attorney Janice before we close? All good?
Just
All right. Go ahead, Vigil, please.
on, sorry.
No, Janice, go ahead.
Okay. Just wanted to add on the behavioral change and for the schools, because for the government, for us, we are actually improving our K to 12, our modules for from the grade school up to the up grade 1 to grade 12, to include environmental awareness to our students. So, and it's a good thing that you mentioned about role models. So, but for us, it's an integral part. That's why we do it in the classrooms, and the lessons that the teachers are teaching will include environmental awareness and how plastics um especially single-use plastics, may affect us if it's not properly disposed of. So I think behavioral change is one of the it's really one of the important issues, especially here in the Philippines, because we need to have no waste segregation at source. If we
Mhm.
have that, then we can proceed with the other steps or the other next steps in the life cycle of the plastics.
Yes. Thank you very much, Attorney Janice, for that. And lastly, Vigil, a quick takeaway, maybe? Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Nothing more that is, we definitely agree that's very important. Upstream actions, education, behavior change, any redesign that can be done. So we just fully support that.
Great. Thank you very much, Vigil. And at this point, we wrap up this discussion. It has been a very, active and a very informative session among all our experts. Thank you very much for being here. As we close this program, I'd like to thank the panel, which has shown how urgent it is to address the plastic pollution problem and, bridging the gap, the finance gaps towards a circular economy. Now, more than anything, I hope this webinar has offered invaluable insights into how Southeast Asia can navigate finance and benefit from the global shift towards a circular economy. Again, thank you very much to our panelists, Janice, Attorney Janice, Virgil, Gilan, and our actors, Dion and Aurora, and to all the participants in today's webinar. Thank you very much for joining us. Again, this has been Rocky Guzman from the Asian Development Bank. Thank you everyone for tuning in this afternoon, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you,
Thank you so
everyone.
much. Bye.